You pull out your card, tap it, and the item is yours. You barely noticed the money leave. That invisible transaction is the most expensive feature your bank ever gave you. Before we go any further, this video is for educational purposes only. It explores documented psychological research. It is not financial advice. Always consult a qualified professional for your specific situation. Here is the starting point. When you pay for something, your brain is processing two things at the same time. The anticipation of getting what you want. And the loss of what you are giving up to get it. The first one produces a reward signal. The second one does not. Behavioral economists Dražen Prelec and George Lowenstein gave a name to that second signal in a 1998 paper published in Marketing Science. The paper was titled The Red and the Black, Mental Accounting of Savings and Debt. Their observation was precise: payments do not feel neutral. The act of paying produces a form of psychological friction that runs counter to the pleasure of acquisition. They called it the pain of paying. The pain of paying is not constant. It changes based on how clearly the payment and the purchase feel connected. Prelec and Lowenstein described this as coupling. When payment and consumption are tightly coupled, you feel the cost as it happens. The friction is high. When they are loosely coupled, the cost recedes and the friction fades. Cash is tight coupling. You walk to a register. You count bills. You watch them leave your hand. At every point in that exchange, the fact that money is leaving you is present to your attention. The loss is visible, physical, and complete before you turn to walk away. A card is looser coupling. You tap a surface. A tone sounds. The item is yours. What left your account is an abstraction. No physical transfer, no deliberate counting, no moment of handing something away and watching it go. The same economic event occurred. But its registration in your experience is quieter. A subscription renewal is even looser. The charge happens on a fixed date, drawn from an account you are not watching at that moment, for a service that is already present in your life. The payment is so decoupled from the consumption that it arrives as a line on a statement rather than a felt cost. Now here is why coupling matters for financial behavior specifically. The pain of paying is not just a form of discomfort. It is also how price becomes salient. When a cost is present to your attention, you can evaluate it. You can compare it to alternatives. You can ask whether it is worth it. When the cost recedes from attention, that evaluation either happens more briefly or does not happen at all. The budget constraint is still real. The money still leaves. But the moment in which you could most usefully consider both of those facts has become shorter or has disappeared entirely. This is the framework that makes sense of everything that follows. Now here is where the framework becomes measurable. In 2001, Dražen Prelec and Duncan Symester, both working at MIT at the time, published a study in Marketing Letters. The paper was titled, Always Leave Home Without It, a further investigation of the credit card effect on willingness to pay. They ran a sealed bid auction. The item on offer was tickets to a sold-out Boston Celtics basketball game. Participants were told this was a real auction with real stakes. The highest bid would win the tickets, and the winner would pay the amount they had bid. The design had one critical variable. Half the participants were told they would need to pay in cash if they won. The other half were told they could pay by credit card. Everything else was identical. Same game, same tickets, same information, same auction rules. The result was striking. The average bid from the credit card group was nearly twice as high as the average bid from the cash group. The researchers described the effect as large, up to 100% in some conditions, and they concluded it was unlikely to be explained by liquidity constraints. This is an important point. The obvious alternative explanation is that people simply did not have enough cash on hand to bid as high. Prelec and Symester controlled for this and concluded the payment method itself was the primary driver. What this result exposes is a challenge to a comfortable assumption. We tend to think that the price we are willing to pay for something reflects what that thing is worth to us. A rational agent, faced with the same item under the same conditions, should produce a stable valuation. But the auction shows that valuation is not stable across payment conditions. The same person, in the same moment, looking at the same set of tickets, produces a different bid depending on whether the payment will feel real or will feel abstract. The amount you are willing to pay for something is not purely a function of how much you value that thing. It is also a function of how much paying for it costs you, not financially but psychologically. Reduce the felt cost of paying, and your assessment of the item's value rises to fill the space. The same item. The same person. The same moment. Twice the bid. This finding does something specific to the standard picture of consumer decision-making. The conventional model assumes that what you are willing to pay for something reflects a stable underlying preference. You value the item at some amount, and that amount is roughly consistent across situations. What the auction shows is that this consistency breaks down when the payment mechanism changes. The preference is not stable. It is constructed in part by the conditions of the transaction itself. This has implications beyond sports tickets. If willingness to pay for a given item is sensitive to payment friction, then every time friction is reduced, consumers are likely to find themselves paying amounts they would not have agreed to in a different payment context. Not because they were deceived about the price. Because the psychological conditions that govern their assessment of whether the price is acceptable have been altered by the design of how they pay. Now trace that logic through 2 decades of payment technology. When electronic card payments first became widespread, completing a transaction involved signing a paper receipt. There was a physical step, a moment of commitment, a record you took with you. Swiping a card often meant entering a PIN or waiting for authorization. Multiple moments where attention was directed at the fact that a transaction was occurring. Contactless payments removed the PIN requirement for small amounts. Then for larger amounts in more contexts. One tap. Faster, lower friction, lower salience. The payment window, the moment in which the cost is actively present to your awareness, contracted. Digital wallets extended this further. The device already in your hand becomes the payment terminal. There is no separate object to locate or produce. The gesture of paying is almost indistinguishable from any other interaction with a screen. For many purchases it takes less time than unlocking the device. One-click purchasing on major retail platforms removed the checkout process from online buying. Before one-click existed, completing an online purchase meant entering shipping details, reviewing payment information, looking at an order summary, and confirming. Several distinct moments where the transaction was visible. One-click collapsed that sequence into a single action, compressing the payment window to near zero. Buy now pay later platforms have taken the logic into a different dimension. They do not only reduce friction at the point of payment. They move the payment itself forward in time and break it into smaller amounts. You receive the item now. The cost arrives later, divided into installments, across a billing cycle that feels distant from the decision to purchase. The split payment structure does not reduce the cost of a purchase. It reduces the experience of the cost. And there is a documented gap between those two things. Consumer financial protection research on BNPL usage shows that average transaction amounts are modest but that frequency and total annual spending per user have climbed consistently as these platforms have grown. The data follows the direction the pain of paying mechanism predicts. When the felt cost of a purchase decreases, the volume and size of purchases tends to increase. There is also a subtler point about subscription services. They charge on a recurring basis with no required action on the consumer side. The payment recurs automatically. The coupling between what you are consuming and what you are paying is at its loosest. You use the service throughout the month, and the charge arrives on a fixed date as a background event. Consumers frequently report surprise at the total cost of their subscriptions when they review statements carefully. The loose coupling between payment and consumption makes the relationship between cost and value harder to evaluate in either direction. The payment system is not just a delivery mechanism for transactions. Its design shapes the experience of cost. A word on what this does and does not mean. This is not an argument for switching to cash for every purchase. Payment methods involve genuine trade-offs in security, record-keeping, convenience, and access. The appropriate response to understanding the pain of paying effect is personal and situational, and it cannot be prescribed from here. What the research provides is a frame for a specific kind of experience. The frictionless payment is not neutral. It is not simply convenient. It is the result of design choices that have been made, consistently and commercially, in the direction that reduces your felt sense of cost. That reduction is a feature of the payment system, not a side effect of it. When Prelec and Lowenstein described the pain of paying in 1998, they framed it as a signal. The aversion response to spending is the mind's way of registering that something of value is leaving. Tight coupling amplifies that signal. Loose coupling mutes it. And muting the signal does not change the economic reality. It changes your experience of it. The practical consequence of this is a kind of spending drift. When individual transactions feel smaller than they are, the aggregate cost of a month's purchases can exceed what you would have predicted at the start of it. Not because any single decision was dramatically wrong, but because each decision was made in conditions that systematically underrepresented its cost. The frictionless environment is not a neutral context for financial decision-making. It is a biased one. The systems that process your payments do not have an interest in that signal being loud. They have an interest in transactions occurring, at the highest possible volume and value. The direction of payment design, from signed receipts to tap-to-pay to embedded subscriptions, follows that interest with considerable consistency. This does not make any particular payment system predatory by design. It makes it understandable. The behavior follows the incentives. The outcome is a world in which the moment of spending, for most purchases in most contexts, has been engineered to produce as little discomfort as possible. Understanding this is not a solution. It is a starting condition for making sense of behavior that often surprises people about themselves. Why you spent more than you intended. Why the subscription you barely use still feels difficult to cancel. Why the itemized receipt arriving at the end of a meal can produce a different feeling from the one you had while ordering. The gap between paying and feeling the payment is not accidental. It is a design specification. In 1998, Prelec and Lowenstein documented the pain that accompanies spending and identified payment design as a key variable in how salient that pain becomes. In 2001, Prelec and Simister measured the practical consequence, a difference of up to 100% in willingness to pay, for identical items, when the payment method changed from cash to card. In the decades since, payment systems have evolved without exception in the direction that those findings predict. You tap your card. The item is yours. You barely noticed the money leave. That gap has been measured. It has been studied. And it has been designed for